Example of the activity of an A subunit of a type 3 AB toxin is ADP ribosylation of a target protein. And so that works pretty much like this, where you have a NAD, which is an electron carrier that's typical in cells, and it consists of a ribose sugar, and then and so you see ribose phosphodiester bonded to another ribose, and so an actual adenine. And so in this nicotinamide and ribose, phosphate, ribose, and then adenosine. And so here's the here's the target protein in its active form. In this particular case, the toxin will grab this ADP ribose group and stick it onto this target protein. And so here our target protein ends up with this ADP ribose group on it. And there's the nicotinamide released as well. But the point is that this target protein with this extra functional group sticking off of it loses its ability to function properly. So I'll give you an example of that. Here's diphtheria toxin, or DTX, produced by the bacterium Corynebacterium diphtheriae. Excuse me. And so diphtheria toxin is an AB toxin, as you see here, and there's a very specific receptor. So imagine this happening like in your throat, where diphtheria causes most of its initial problems. And so the diphtheria toxin's B portion binds to the toxin receptor, and that binding causes an endocytosis event that allows the A portion to translocate across the membrane of the vacuole into the cytoplasm. So the A portion will then grab NAD and its target protein, in this particular case, elongation factor 2, which is essential for protein synthesis. It'll steal an ADP ribose off of NAD and stick it onto EF2. So there's the ADP ribose that it stole from NAD, added to EF2. As a result, EF2 cannot do its job in helping in protein synthesis. Again, the catalytic A domain, ADP ribosylates elongation factor 2, which halts protein synthesis and kills the cell. And so typically in diphtheria, we see individuals, often children, dying of heart failure as a result of the toxin entering the bloodstream. Usually the bacteria colonize the throat. They produce the toxin in the throat. The toxin enters the bloodstream and then eventually will bind to heart cells, for example. And the B portion binds, the A portion translocates across and basically poisons the heart cells. And so the patient often dies from that type of a problem, from cardiac arrest. Another example of an AB type toxin is Botox, produced by Clostridium botulinum, a gram-positive spore-forming anaerobe. These guys are common in the soil and so forth, so they often get into food supplies and so forth. But Botox, and again, this is the actual Botox, the chemical that people inject into their face to smooth out wrinkles. The difference is they often will they will dilute it about, 20, 30, 40 fold or something like that, so that the toxin is less potent, so that all it does is smooths out your skin instead of causing disease. But basically the toxin looks like this. It has an A portion with protease activity, and it's a zinc requiring protease activity, and a B portion for binding. And so again, typically the bacterium will mature the protein on its own. Sometimes it's some strains of Clostridium rely on the host to mature the Botox protein. But in either case, the toxin looks something like this and has to be matured first before it actually does its job. And its job in this case is to cause neurological problems. Botulism is a neurotoxin, essentially. And so in a normal situation, you have acetylcholine-induced contraction of a muscle. And so here's our motor neuron, and then a little synapse here across that motor neuron. And so this guy will produce acetylcholine, which will bind to a receptor and then stimulate contraction. And then there will be an inhibitor signal, which removes this, and then the muscle can then release and relax. And so in this particular case, then, here's the Botox AB toxin. So the B portion binds, the A portion goes in and destroys the ability of acetylcholine to be released across this little synapse. And so in this particular case, the failure to release the acetylcholine neurotransmitter results in a perpetual state of relaxation. And as a result, this relaxation causes something called flaccid paralysis. So in flaccid paralysis, the individual literally can't breathe. The smooth muscles of their lungs, for example, can't flex, can't contract and release and contract and release. Even with the same thing with the heart muscles can't contract and release to pump. And so everything just becomes basically droopy. And usually the individual has to, have supportive care, put on a respirator and so forth in order to survive that kind of situation. Tetanus toxin is basically the same thing with a slightly different binding location. So in this particular case, tetanus toxin, here's the peripheral nerve terminal, here's an inhibitory motor neuron, and here's the stimulatory motor neuron in this particular case. So here's our acetylcholine. Then the inhibitor will produce its gamma aminobutyric acid, whatever, and transiently block acetylcholine so you can get contraction and relaxation. But tetanus toxin will bind to this inhibitor neuron and block the release of the inhibitor. And as a result, you get constant stimulation through uninhibited acetylcholine release. And that results in a contracted state, a constant contracted state. So again, it's the opposite effect, but it's no less deadly. So imagine your heart just seizing up like an engine block that hasn't been given any oil. And as a result, this is kind of a hyperbole, but I've never seen a patient quite like that. Usually they're on their side when they're like that, but it does happen. This is a painting from the War of 1812, I think. No, one of the Napoleonic Wars, something like that. I think it was one of Napoleon's surgeons or something like that drew this picture. But anyway, it's a very famous picture. I think the man's name was Bell. But anyway, it doesn't matter. This is an individual dying of tetanus and what's also called spastic paralysis as opposed to flaccid paralysis and botulism. So you can see that this individual has, his bicep is flexing and pulling his arm up into a tight flex. His toes are curled because the muscles here are flexing and curling inward. The individual's bent like this because the lower back muscles are competing with the abdominal muscles, and because they tend to be stronger will bend the individual backwards like this. And other features include his clenching fists, all the muscles in your hand clenching to form a fist. And the individual often has a look on their face like just, like they're smiling almost, but the masseter, the jaw muscle is completely clenched so that their teeth are showing. And they're in the throes of death at this point, because you can imagine if their bicep and everything else is flexed, what their heart is, is completely seized.